their mortgage. I paid their meds. And then I found out they left me nothing. Not even the damn china cabinet. That sentence has played on repeat in my mind like a scratched record, skipping over and over the same bitter beat. I used to laugh at people who said life could flip in an instant, but I wasn't laughing the day I sat in my parents' lawyer's office, staring at the ugliest truth I'd ever seen spelled out in black ink. After everything I did for them, after every unpaid hour I spent keeping their heads above water, they gave it all to my brother. Todd. Of course it was Todd. Let me rewind a bit, because I want you to understand how deep this betrayal cuts. For 5 years, no, closer to 6, really, I've been quietly carrying the weight of their lives on my back. It wasn't glamorous or noble. It was survival. My parents never had much in savings, and after Dad's health took a nosedive, their expenses started piling up faster than the mailman could stuff the bills through the slot. I stepped in like any good daughter would. I didn't complain, not at first. I told myself I was doing the right thing, even when it meant I couldn't afford vacations, even when it meant I took on a second job just to keep up. Every month, like clockwork, I paid their mortgage. When Mom needed new meds after her insurance dropped coverage, I covered it without blinking. When the dishwasher died, I didn't even hesitate before pulling money from my own emergency fund to replace it. I did it quietly. No parades, no fanfare, no gold stars. Just dutiful, invisible support. And all the while, Todd floated around in the background like a ghost of responsibility. He was always good at that, showing up just enough to be seen, but never long enough to actually help. He lives in Arizona now, selling God knows what to God knows who, always with a new girlfriend and a story about how close he is to closing some imaginary business deal. But my parents, bless them, still saw him as their shining star. They never said it out loud, but you could see it in their eyes. You could hear it in the way they talked about him like he walked on water, while I was just there. Useful, convenient, necessary, but never celebrated. I never imagined they'd put it in writing. I mean, sure, I always felt like the afterthought, but there's a difference between suspicion and confirmation. Sitting in that lawyer's office, holding a copy of their will, was like being slapped in the face with every childhood memory I'd buried under years of forced smiles and polite dinners. Every last thing, house, car, savings, even the stupid antique furniture I hated dusting as a kid, was going to Todd. Not a single mention of me. Not even a damn photo album. The lawyer tried to read my face, probably waiting for tears or some dramatic reaction. I gave him nothing. I just nodded, thanked him, and walked out of there with my insides boiling like lava under skin. I drove home with my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in my kitchen that night, lights off, staring at the spreadsheet where I tracked all their expenses. I kept thinking about that time last winter when the roof started leaking and I spent $2,000 getting it patched because Dad said the insurance company was giving him the runaround. Or when their car battery died in the middle of a snowstorm and I paid for a tow truck and a new one without thinking twice. Hell, even their dog's vet bills landed on my credit card more than once. I didn't do it for recognition. But I damn sure didn't do it so they could write me out like I never existed. I poured myself a glass of wine, cheap stuff, because I'd been cutting corners to pay their bills, and sat down at my computer. I opened the banking portal. One by one, I canceled every automatic payment linked to their address. Mortgage? Gone. Utilities? Canceled. Insurance premiums? Not my problem anymore. My fingers didn't even hesitate. It was like my body had been waiting for this moment, some final act of self-preservation I didn't even know I was capable of. That night, I stopped the automatic payments. Cold turkey. Just like that. And I'll tell you something, I slept better than I had in years. But I knew, deep in my gut, that silence wouldn't last long. If you've never grown up in the shadow of someone else's spotlight, let me tell you something, it starts off subtle. It's in the little things, the things they think you won't notice. The way your mother's voice softens when she says his name. The way your father's eyes light up when he talks about his so-called accomplishments, no matter how minor or downright fictional they might be. For me, it started before I was old enough to tie my own shoes. Todd was the sun, and the rest of us were just expected to orbit around him without making too much noise. I remember the day Todd turned 16 like it was yesterday. The weather was miserable, gray clouds hanging low like the sky couldn't even pretend to be cheerful. But inside our house, it was all streamers and balloons and cake from that expensive bakery downtown. And the grand finale? A brand new car sitting in the driveway, complete with a big red bow that my mother must have spent half an hour fluffing just right. Todd ran outside, whooping like he'd just won the lottery, while I stood there in my hand-me-down jeans, holding a dust rag because apparently I still needed to finish cleaning the living room before guests arrived. 16 for him meant freedom, celebration, and keys to a shiny new life. 16 for me meant dishes and vacuuming and a reminder that I wasn't the one they were proud of. And it didn't stop there. Todd was the golden boy, always had been. He could fail a class, and somehow it was the teacher's fault. He could crash the car, yes, the same one they gifted him, and they still paid to fix it with barely a scolding. Meanwhile, I once brought home a B- in math and spent the weekend grounded with no TV privileges. I worked part-time in high school to afford a used laptop, while Todd got the latest gadgets simply because he needed them for college, though half the time they ended up gathering dust on his desk. He never held a real job longer than a few months, always floating from one half-baked scheme to the next. Selling overpriced supplements, running some sketchy online business, or talking about investing in crypto like he was the next financial guru. And through it all, my parents applauded him like he was doing something extraordinary, like he was too brilliant for the 9-to-5 grind the rest of us slogged through. They called him entrepreneurial, while I was just reliable. I guess in their eyes, being dependable was dull. Being flashy, even if you were full of hot air, was something to celebrate. You want to know the real kicker? He lives across the damn country now. Packed up and moved to Arizona years ago, said he needed a change of scenery. He visits maybe once a year, if that, and when he does, it's like the second coming of Christ. My mom cooks his favorite meals, my dad dusts off old stories, and the whole house revolves around his presence. Meanwhile, I was the one showing up every weekend with groceries, calling doctors, managing prescriptions, fixing leaky faucets, driving them to appointments, and dealing with their cranky moods when the cable went out. And yet, they still left it all to him. Not just the house or the savings, but every damn thing they owned. It's almost funny in a sick, twisted way. Todd, who can barely manage his own bills, now holds the title to their house. Todd, who once tried to use their address to take out a loan, is somehow the chosen one. You tell me, does that sound fair? Did your family ever treat one sibling like royalty and the other like the maid? Tell me in the comments. I want to know if I'm crazy or just not alone. Because let me tell you, the resentment didn't come out of nowhere. It built up slowly, like rust eating away at something solid until all that's left is hollow disappointment. I swallowed it for years, told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But after that will? After seeing my name completely erased from their plans, like I was a guest in their lives instead of a daughter, that rust turned to rage. They made their choice. Now they can live with it. There's something unnervingly quiet about the moment right before the fallout begins, like the hush before a storm, when the air goes still and your instincts tell you something's about to shift. That silence hit me like a whisper through the walls the first time I drove past their house after stopping the payments. It looked the same from the outside, same chipped paint near the gutters, same mailbox with the crooked post my father never fixed, but I knew something had changed beneath the surface. Not just in their bank account, but in the entire dynamic that had held us hostage for decades. Something invisible had snapped. It didn't take long for the first domino to fall. The water was the first to go, just a routine disconnection, one of those cold bureaucratic procedures that doesn't care who you are or how long you've lived there. A neighbor told me later that she saw my father hauling a bucket from the backyard spigot like it was 1952. I didn't feel good about it, but I didn't feel bad either. I felt nothing, and maybe that scared me more than anything else. You spend your whole life aching to be noticed by the people who raised you, and when they finally feel your absence, all you feel is peace. A few days later, my phone buzzed with the first message. It was from my mother, polite and restrained, like she didn't want to assume anything but still needed to ask. "Hey, sweetheart," it read, "something's wrong with the account. The water bill didn't go through. Just checking in." I stared at that message for a full minute, maybe longer, letting it sit there on the screen like a ghost trying to crawl its way back into my life. I didn't respond. I didn't even mark it as read. I just locked the screen and slid the phone into my bag without a word. That night, I poured myself a drink and sat on the couch without guilt for the first time in months. I wasn't responsible anymore. I wasn't the family safety net. I wasn't the invisible lifeline they only noticed when it disappeared. I was just a woman in her own home, listening to the soft hum of electricity that I paid for with my own damn money. But the silence didn't last. The next morning, another message came in, this time a little more direct. "Did you forget to update the autopay info? Dad says the power company sent a notice." Still polite, but you could feel the edges fraying. I ignored that one too. And then the calls started. First from my mom, then from my dad, then from their landline, then from a number I didn't recognize, probably my father using someone else's phone. I didn't answer a single one. I watched the screen light up again and again, names I knew too well flashing like old wounds refusing to scab over. By the end of the first week, their polite concern had twisted into mild panic. My mother's texts started coming in faster, her tone more urgent. "Please let me know what's going on. Are you okay? This isn't like you." And still, I said nothing. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I wanted the silence to speak for itself. Let them sit with it. Let them feel the weight of absence, the sting of abandonment. Let them experience the hollow echo of reaching out and getting nothing back, something I'd known intimately for years. Then came week 2, and with it, the inevitable shift from polite inquiry to full-blown desperation. One night, close to midnight, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was all caps, no subtlety, no sugarcoating, no pretending. "The mortgage is due." That was it. No greeting, no question, just raw panic thrown at me in digital ink. I stared at it for a long time, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what I wanted to say, and I wanted to savor the moment. I typed out 4 words. Just 4 simple, pointed words. "Ask your golden boy." And then I hit send. I imagined my mother reading those words, her face falling as the reality settled in, the realization that the daughter they dismissed had finally drawn a line. I pictured the silence on the other end, the awkward conversation she would have to initiate with Todd, the same son she had elevated for decades. I imagined her looking at my father, wondering how they'd let it come to this, wondering if maybe, just maybe, they'd misjudged everything. That was the first time my phone stayed silent for 3 whole days. Not a single call. Not a single message. Just the kind of quiet that stretches long and wide, making space for guilt, regret, and the cold slap of consequence. It didn't take long for the consequences to start blooming like bruises across the walls of the house I once called home, the house I had unknowingly kept afloat for years while they smiled at my brother's empty promises and treated my efforts like background noise. After those 3 days of eerie silence, I figured something had to be brewing beneath the surface, some kind of reckoning slowly bubbling up in that quiet space between panic and pride. And sure enough, it didn't take long for the whispers to find their way back to me, carried not by my parents, because God forbid they speak to me directly, but through the old family grapevine that never truly dies. It was my cousin Lena who dropped the first piece of gossip, casually, over coffee like she wasn't fully aware of the bomb she was about to detonate. "I saw your mom at the pharmacy," she said, stirring her cup like this was just another Tuesday afternoon, and she looked, well, let's just say I haven't seen her that pale since your grandfather's funeral. I raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, letting her fill in the silence the way gossipers love to do. "She was crying," Lena added after a beat, voice softer now, almost uncertain. "She told Mrs. Harmon they might have to sell the dining set to make ends meet." And there it was, the first crack in their carefully polished facade. The idea of my mother, the same woman who once lectured me for donating old furniture to Goodwill instead of passing it down, now pawning off her precious cherrywood table, that was rich. But the irony didn't end there, not even close. A few days later, Lena called again, this time more urgent, more eager, like the scandal had evolved into a full-blown soap opera. "You won't believe this," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "Todd said he's not helping." I didn't even flinch. Of course he wasn't helping. That was Todd's signature move, duck and run when the spotlight got too hot. But hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. According to Lena, my mother had called him after receiving the mortgage warning, voice trembling, probably expecting him to swoop in like the prodigal son. But instead, Todd reportedly said, "I didn't ask for the house, and I sure as hell don't want the responsibility." That line echoed in my head like a punchline to a cruel joke. They handed him everything, every penny, every asset, every scrap of legacy, and when the moment came to return the favor, he couldn't even fake concern. No excuses about money being tight, no empty promises about helping later, just a flat-out refusal, the kind you can't twist into anything other than what it is. And suddenly, they were alone in the hole they'd dug for themselves, with no ladder and no one left to blame but each other. Panic, from what I heard, set in fast. They started calling relatives, trying to float the idea of borrowing money or selling off things they once claimed were family heirlooms. Even Aunt Marie got a call, and she's been practically disowned since she married that jazz musician my father hated. They tried to act subtle about it, of course, phrasing it like they were downsizing or reorganizing their assets, but anyone with half a brain could see the desperation stitched into every polite phone call. And where was I in all this? Living. Actually living, for the first time in years. I booked a cabin near the coast, one of those cozy little places with creaky floors and mismatched curtains that smell like old wood and sea salt. I drank coffee in silence, read books cover to cover, walked barefoot in the sand, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. There was no guilt in my chest, no obligation dragging me back home, no voice whispering that I was being selfish. Just peace. Uncomplicated, unearned, unfamiliar peace. Still, I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about them. Not constantly, but often enough to make me uncomfortable. I wondered how they looked when the power was finally cut, whether they lit candles or just sat in the dark. I wondered what they told the neighbors, if they spun some noble story about bad luck or admitted, even privately, that they had been wrong. I wondered if my mother thought about that text I sent, the 4 words that flipped her world upside down, and whether she finally realized the cost of years spent favoring a fantasy over a daughter. But no matter how many thoughts floated through my mind, I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't reach out. I didn't cave. They'd made their choice, and I was living with mine. Or at least, I thought I was. Because just when I was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, the chapter had closed for good, there came a knock on my door. And everything went quiet again. I knew something was off the second I heard the knock, slow, hesitant, almost timid in its rhythm, the kind of knock that doesn't come from a neighbor borrowing sugar or a delivery driver dropping off a package. It was the kind of knock that carries weight, not just from the knuckles hitting wood, but from the years and guilt behind it. I didn't move right away. I just stood still in the kitchen, holding my coffee mug like it could shield me from whatever was waiting on the other side of that door. 1,000 possibilities ran through my mind, but none prepared me for the sight that met me when I finally opened it. There they were, my parents. Both of them, standing on my porch like strangers who had taken a wrong turn. My mother looked older than I remembered, thinner somehow, with lines carved deeper into her face than the last time I'd seen her in person. Her hair was pulled back into a tight, no-nonsense bun, but even that didn't hide the tremble in her posture. My father stood beside her, hunched and hollow-eyed, his usual air of stubborn pride worn down to dust. Their clothes were wrinkled, their shoes scuffed, and their faces told me everything before either of them spoke a word. I didn't say anything at first. Just stared at them from behind the screen door, coffee still in hand, heart beating a little too loud in my chest. My mother gave a weak smile, one of those sad, watery smiles that tries to bridge a canyon of unspoken damage, and said, "We didn't know where else to go." My father didn't speak, just shifted awkwardly like the weight of silence was heavier than his body could carry. Still, I didn't open the door. I let them stand there, soaking in the discomfort, letting the wind push against their coats while I stood warm and unmoved. I wanted them to feel the cold, the distance, the years of second-hand treatment and subtle dismissal. I wanted them to feel, for once, what I had felt every time they looked through me and toward Todd. "We thought Todd would take care of us," my mother said next, voice cracking under the weight of the confession. "We were wrong." Just like that, no build-up, no elaborate excuse, just the truth delivered like a final act of surrender. I almost laughed at the simplicity of it, the way they tossed that sentence into the air like it could undo everything that had led us here. I didn't let them in. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and stood on the porch facing them. The silence between us was thick and brittle, threatening to snap with every heartbeat. My father finally spoke, his voice low and worn. "We made a mistake," he said. "We didn't mean to hurt you." I took a deep breath, fighting the swirl of emotions rising in my throat. Anger, grief, resentment, vindication, they all danced together in a messy waltz that threatened to pull me under. But I didn't let them see that. I kept my voice steady, my spine straight. "You didn't just make a mistake," I said. "You made a choice." My mother looked down at her hands, wringing them like she could squeeze the shame out through her knuckles. "We thought Todd," she started again, but I cut her off before she could finish the sentence that had become their lifelong mantra. "I saw the will," I said, and their heads both jerked upward. 3 months before you even signed it. Todd showed me." The words dropped like stones into a still pond, rippling through the quiet space between us. Their eyes widened, stunned and unblinking, as the weight of that revelation sank in. My mother's voice barely broke above a whisper. "You knew." I nodded, feeling no need to soften the blow. "I knew. And I still paid your bills. Still brought your groceries. Still fixed your leaky faucets, and fought with insurance companies for your meds. I did all of that knowing exactly where I stood. I did it anyway." My father looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, not as the background daughter, not as the dependable fallback, but as someone with a spine and a voice and a reason to walk away. My mother's face crumpled as the reality hit her full force, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse under the weight of her own regret. I looked at them both one last time before turning back toward the door. "I knew," I said quietly, "and I still paid your bills. Until I didn't." And then I walked inside and closed the door behind me, leaving them standing there in the cold, unsure if I'd ever open it again. There are some decisions that don't come with fireworks or dramatic music, no ominous thunderclouds rolling in, no grand, soul-shaking moment to mark the turning point. Sometimes, it's just a signature on a dotted line, a quiet nod to a realtor, a final glance in the rearview mirror before driving away from a life that never quite felt like your own. That's how it happened for me. No fanfare, no declarations, just one sharp decision that split my world in two and left me staring at a future that finally felt like it belonged to me. The house came up on the listing a week after the last confrontation with my parents. It wasn't flashy or new, but it had a wraparound porch and a big bay window that overlooked a sleepy street where the trees leaned in like they were whispering secrets to each other. It had a little garden bed in the back that needed work and a fireplace that didn't quite draft properly, but I loved it anyway. It felt untouched by history, no ghosts in the walls, no bitter memories in the corners. Just space. Open, quiet space. I made an offer that same day. I didn't tell anyone, not a friend, not a neighbor, and certainly not my parents. I didn't even give myself time to second-guess it. I just packed what I needed, sold the rest, and left without a goodbye. No letter, no voicemail, no breadcrumbs to follow. I didn't owe them a grand exit. I owed myself peace. And peace doesn't always look like forgiveness. It looks like locking the door behind you and throwing the key into a river you never plan to cross again. I changed my number a few days after the move. There was no dramatic reason, no final blow-up. I just didn't want to hear the ring anymore, didn't want to flinch every time a message buzzed through, wondering if it was another desperate attempt from the people who had finally realized what they'd lost. I didn't want to hear empty apologies, or worse, attempts to rewrite the past into something that sounded more palatable. So I disconnected. Quietly. Completely. Sometimes, late at night, when the world goes soft and still, I wonder if it makes me cruel. If walking away from them without a final word was just a colder version of the very neglect I'd endured for decades. But then I remind myself that there's a difference between cruelty and self-preservation, and sometimes those lines blur so badly you can't even see where one ends and the other begins. I've built something here, nothing extravagant, nothing anyone would write home about, but it's mine. I painted the kitchen in a soft olive green that reminds me of spring. I bought mismatched furniture from thrift stores and arranged it all in a way that feels strangely perfect. I planted herbs on the windowsill and started baking bread, not because I needed to, but because I finally had the space to try. There's no one walking behind me, no voice criticizing the color of the curtains, no guilt hanging in the air like smoke. Just me. Just quiet. Just life. And still, I check in on them sometimes, not directly, never that, but from the corners of the internet where curiosity lives. A utility database here, a property tax record there. Just enough to know they haven't sold the house yet. Just enough to see if the lights are still on. I don't know if it's habit or some lingering strand of empathy I haven't snipped clean. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's nothing. About a month after I moved, I opened my old email just once. There was only one message from my mother, dated a week after I disappeared. The subject line was short, just one word: sorry. The message itself remained unopened, sitting there like a time bomb I had no interest in defusing. I didn't read it then, and I haven't read it since. Maybe it's heartfelt. Maybe it's manipulative. Maybe it's both or neither. It doesn't matter. Some apologies arrive years too late. Some words can't mend a wound that's grown its own scab. I keep that message there, unread, like a bookmark I never plan to return to. It's a symbol now, a reminder of everything I escaped and everything I'll never allow back in. Because the truth is, healing doesn't always come wrapped in resolution. Sometimes it comes in silence. Sometimes it comes in distance. And sometimes it comes in the form of a closed door that stays closed. What I did next may haunt me. Or maybe it won't. Maybe it already has, and maybe it's finished. But I know this much: I didn't need revenge, and I didn't need forgiveness. I just needed freedom. Some apologies come too late. And some wounds don't need stitches, they just need distance.